You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on the lampstand, that it may give light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good works and give glory to God in heaven. Once upon a time, there was a world that had grown dark. No one quite remembers when it began. It happened so gradually that most didn't notice until they started bumping into things, until it became hard to read. Even then, most people's eyes had had time to adjust, so they made do, plus who really needed to read. In the center of that small world was a large structure called the Lampstand. As legend had it, it used to shine so brightly that it shined light on the entirety of that small little world. No matter where you stood, it was said you could see the light. But as sometimes happens over the years, it had dimmed. The young people, those who had grown up without ever having seen light, who had grown up in the dark, had a hard time really believing that that lampstand was really there. The old-timers, of course, told stories about a moment when that light used to shine so brightly, when people didn't bump into each other as much, when the lampstand was always on, but even they had a hard time believing that it ever actually was the case. And after a while, they just accepted the world as it was. Dark. Not that they liked it. One of the favorite pastimes, of course, was complaining about the darkness. What else were they going to do? They would gather in those dark rooms of their dark houses in dark little groups and complain about the darkness, about how much better the world would be if it was just a little lighter, if someone would dare to just go out and shine a little light. One thing they didn't do, of course, was shine it. They were too busy trying to figure out who was to blame to shine any light of their own. And they had no shortage of opinions about that. In fact, virtually the only thing that those dark little groups agreed on was who was to blame for the darkness. That seemed so obvious to them, the other groups. They were the ones who had taken away the lampstand. They were the ones who had taken away the light. They were the ones who pitched them into darkness. And maybe because they didn't have to look anyone in the eye, including themselves, they didn't mind sharing exactly how they felt. They didn't have to see anyone take what they said. So they just said it. And the world grew dark. Now, it didn't take long in that little world before those small groups started to get together. Finding one another, they would combine and grow until really there just became two groups, two on either side of that large lampstand that no longer glowed. On the left or the right of it, people would find their way to one, and they valued loyalty to that group above all else, and loyalty they got. After all, it was that group that promised to guide them through the darkness. It was that group who promised that they had the way, the right way, the light way. And before long, people only got together with people within their little group. within the group that stood on their side of that lampstand. Sure, they knew other groups were out there fumbling around in the dark just like them, but the less they had to interact with them as individuals, the easier it became to dismiss them as a group. They even developed nice ways of communicating with each other so that anytime a story happened, that anytime something happened in that dark little world, they could just hear it from the perspective of the group that already believed what they believed. Back when there was still a little light shining, of course, truth did seem to matter, at least a little bit. They would at least pay some lip service to the truth, but the darker the world got, the less the truth seemed to matter at all. Who wants to let a little thing like truth stand in the way of what we already believed? And the world grew darker. Now, from time to time, of course, there would be leaders that stood up in that dark world promising a little light. They would find some affinity with the groups around them, and they would raise them up. And a long time ago, back when there was a little light, they would at least try to reach out to other people on other sides of that lampstand. They would reach out and do their very best to find a way to pull others in, to at least listen to others. But as time went on and the world grew darker, they found that less and less necessary. No, a funny thing happened when they would reach out to people in their group. When they started just focusing on their own group, they grew more and more loved. They didn't have to pay attention to anybody else. People started to forgive the things that they would have found abhorrent just a little while before. They started to dismiss behavior, self-serving, that would have never been okay when there was a little light. Because, hey, at least they're a part of our group. And leaders stopped even speaking about the light, recognizing that their little groups were comfortable in the dark. And at some point, that little dark world forgot that the lampstand had ever been there. After all, in the dark, even the biggest things in our life disappear. And the world grew darker. Now, there was another group in that little world. An older group called the Children of the Light. They were the ones who had been charged with keeping that lampstand burning. They were the ones who were charged with the light of the world. Only given the state of the world, clearly they had fallen down on their jobs. They were an ancient people. For thousands of years they'd been around, and they had all the challenges that came with being around for thousands of years: institutional failures, problems that had developed, factions that had formed within the groups. But at their core, there was something. There was something there, right there in the center of their group, something eternal that they didn't want to let go of, a promise that there was a light that shines in the darkness that no darkness can overwhelm. It was a promise given to them by one that they were attempting to follow, one who claimed to be the light of the world, who claimed that they too were the light of the world, that they just had to let their light shine into the world. To everyone else, of course, it seemed utterly ridiculous. If there was indeed a light that shined in the darkness that no darkness could overwhelm, it ought to be awfully easy to see in a dark, dark world. But looking around, people couldn't see anything. In fact, most of those who claimed to be children of the light didn't make the world around them any brighter. Quite the opposite, in fact. And so young people who grew up as children of the light reached a certain age, looked around, saw that no one was actually shining any light, and decided to walk away, to go find someplace else where they might find the light if they bothered to look at all. Not everyone. There were those, of course, who would gather together weekly to witness to the light. They would gather together in groups and sing songs and pray prayers and hear stories about the light. They built beautiful buildings, or so they were told, that if the lampstand ever lit up again would shine and offer something beautiful for this dark world. They even paid someone who would speak to them each week about the beauty of shining light in the world. It was sometimes boring, but there were cookies. And sometimes, every once in a while, maybe when there was a guest speaker or something, they would walk out so moved by what had been said that they were absolutely glowing, committed to shining a little light in the week ahead. Only few did. No, instead, they would gather together people from both sides of the lampstand to just for a moment sing the same songs, face in the same direction, make the same commitment to walk in the light, and then head right back out into the darkness, committed more to their groups than their charge. And the world grew darker. Day by day, month by month, year by year, the world grew darker. Until there came a moment. Nobody quite knows exactly how they knew they reached it, but they reached it. There came a moment when people looked around and said, this can't be the only thing. That there has to be something more, that maybe we're missing something in this world, that surely there can't just be darkness. Maybe in this world we have a choice. Maybe we have a choice about how we're going to live. Maybe we can choose either to walk in the darkness or to walk in the light. As one said, whether to walk in the light of creative altruism or the darkness of destructive selfishness. Maybe we can choose whether to walk in the light or the dark. And once they knew they had the choice, then they just waited for someone to make it. And it did take someone making it. They just waited for someone who'd be brave enough to maybe step out in faith, to step out to break the quagmire, to step out into that place of impasse, not because they knew their group would love it, but because they knew the world, their little world, needed it. They needed someone to stand up, not because any group was right, but because in as much as neither were willing to take a step towards another as individuals, both were wrong. And so they waited. Until someone stepped forward. No one quite knows who it was. It was awfully dark. But someone stepped forward in that moment, maybe a child of the light, stepped forward down into that dark place. They had grown so far apart, but they found their way, fumbling around in the dark, into that place where they believed that lampstand would have been. They found their way down, and not knowing what else to do, they reached out their hand. Only to find another. And in their embrace, high above their head, at the top of that lampstand where both groups could see no matter where they stood, no matter how far apart they found themselves, on top of that lampstand there was a glow. And as the groups took a collective breath and a step forward, it only grew. And for the first time that any could remember, the world grew a little brighter. Friends, we are the light of the world.